Welcome. My name is Peter Strong. I specialize in mindfulness therapy for the treatment of anxiety disorders. So mindfulness is an extremely powerful form of conscious awareness that can really make all the difference if you're struggling with anxiety. So I specialize in teaching mindfulness methods and techniques for overcoming anxiety. And I do this online. So if you're interested in talking to an online therapist for anxiety, then please contact me and let's schedule a few online therapy sessions. The mindfulness approach, as I say, is very powerful indeed. And what it fundamentally does is it breaks you out of those unconscious reactive habits that create your anxiety. So anxiety is best described as a habit rather than some sort of medical disorder. I think that's the wrong approach if you want to overcome anxiety. If you want to just suppress symptoms, then you might use a medical approach and anti-anxiety medications. But that's not what I advocate because it does not really address the underlying cause of your anxiety. And that is these accumulated unconscious habits, psychological habits that create anxiety. And during mindfulness therapy, we look very carefully at these inner habits. We actually learn how to meditate on our anxiety so we can examine it in great detail and see how it works. We look for the triggers, first of all. What are the specific triggers that trigger anxiety reactions? Then we look at what happens in the mind as we replay these triggers during our meditation. Typically, most people see that what really gets triggered in the mind is imagery, some form of internal psychological imagery that has a strong emotional charge. That imagery is what really causes the anxiety. So the trigger triggers the imagery in the mind out of habit, and that imagery then triggers the emotion. So when we meditate on our anxiety, we look for this imagery, and the more that you see of the details of that imagery, the more you can change. Because when you see the imagery in the mind consciously, then you're able to change it. You're able to help that imagery change. For example, very commonly people say to me that they feel overwhelmed by their anxiety. Well, that tells me straight away that the anxiety imagery is very large. It's also probably above you. It's high in your visual field, the way you see it in the mind. You don't see it on the floor, you see it above you. Now, it has to be above you to be overwhelming. It also has to be very large to be overwhelming. And by that same reasoning, it cannot be overwhelming if it is on the floor, and it cannot be overwhelming if you make it the size of a grain of sand. So that imagery really defines our emotions. Typically, we don't see that imagery because we don't look. Well, during mindfulness therapy, we do look. We look very closely at the structure of our anxiety to see this imagery, and then we explore changing it. We explore changing its size, its position, its spatial position, perhaps its color, Perhaps it's texture. Typically, when people look at the imagery of anxiety, they will usually see red or orange colors that seems to resonate with the feeling of fear or anxiety. If you were looking at the imagery of depression, you would probably not see red or orange, but more likely black or grey or dark purple. Those are very common colors. Again, those are part of the structure that creates the emotion. Just because the emotion has a certain color or certain size or position does not mean that that has to stay in that configuration. It only shows up in that way because of habits. So when you bring mindfulness to that habit, you bring choice, and you can start to change the imagery. And when you change the imagery of anxiety, you will diffuse the imagery, you will diffuse the emotion, you will effectively neutralize it. And it's possible to then sit and examine those triggers to bring them into the mind and not experience anxiety. So that's all part of mindfulness therapy, and that's what I teach online, and it works extremely well. Most people who work with me using mindfulness-based image reprocessing see quite dramatic results in the first 2 or 3 sessions. It's not that difficult to overcome anxiety when you actually look at how it works. That's what's usually missing in a lot of talk therapy, and is completely missing in medical treatment approaches which don't look at anything. So if you want to get help from an online therapist who specializes in the treatment of anxiety using mindfulness, then please contact me and let's schedule some Skype therapy sessions. Typically, you'll see results even after that very first session with me, and then as you start applying these mindfulness methods and mindfulness meditation to work with your anxiety yourself at home, then change is greatly accelerated. Of course, it's always what you do in between sessions that's far more important than what happens during the session. So if you'd like to get started and overcome your anxiety using mindfulness-based methods, please contact me and let's schedule a session. Thank you.